Pardon?
I didn't know God went to bed.
God went to bed?
You know God goes to bed?
He is.
That's all right there. I think of you in bed.
That's how we get divisions in the church. Anyway, just a quick summary of what we do for those that aren't normally with us on Wednesday nights. I provide the lesson for everyone, and the notes that you have are the notes that I'm going to read. Some people like to take them home and so on and so forth, but we stop along the way some of the time and get into discussion on stuff, but I also have a 45-minute limit. Typically, we would have a prayer time at the beginning of our lesson, but with prayer requests and so on and so forth. But because we do that in our 11 o'clock time, we won't do this. So we'll get right into the lesson. Also, it was like, do we move the chairs around like we do Wednesday night and so on and so forth? But we live stream at 11 o'clock. We're also live streaming this. So if people want to see it later on and check it out, they can do the lessons. If you're on live stream with us, and we welcome you. And also, we're doing a study of the book of Psalms, and we do a psalm each week, and we're at Psalm 63 so far. So it's been a year and a half that we've been doing this, and we'll be another year and a half at least to finish it. So it's with 150 psalms. Except for one psalm that I went through, Psalm 23, and it took 12 weeks to get through that. It was a little bit longer than what I expected, but anyway, this is what we do. And so we're on to a different schedule. What did they say? 9 o'clock is now the 10 o'clock, or 10 o'clock is now the 11 o'clock? How do they say that? Or is the new 10 o'clock is the new 11? What's the saying? I don't know. Whatever. So before we get into the lesson, we will open up in prayer, and I'm going to ask Dawn if you could lead us in a prayer before we get into Psalm 63. All right, thank you. On all the Psalms that I do, I always use an alternate version every week. Some of the time, someone will tell you something. Your parents would tell you over and over and over, and then somebody new comes along and says the exact same thing, but using different words. It's like, wow, I've never heard that before. And you go home and your mother's like, I've been telling you that for years. We can read the same version over and over and over. And so to hear it in different vernacular is sometimes good. And so I use a different translation every week. And but in the body of the lesson itself, I always refer to the NIV. I always use that as my text unless it's otherwise noted. So today's text is from the International Standard Version for Psalm 63, and it's a Davidic psalm or a psalm of David, and it's while he was in the Judean wilderness. And the main theme of it is a joyful trust in God. And so I'll invite somebody to read this psalm aloud for us, and I'll open that to whoever would like to do that. Yep. All right. And I wrote down at the bottom there, what an amazing song for us to start 2024 with. I start off with a question. Have you ever felt like your life is or has been a wandering in the wilderness? Here's the reality. The sun does not shine every day. That's very true up here. There are droughts, deaths, diseases, and destruction. Life is not only experienced in the open fields of a happy harvest. We also sometimes go through the weeds and thistles of the wilderness. The wilderness is wild and it's untamed. It's a dangerous place. The wilderness is a place of emotional instability and mental uncertainty. And we're using the language of metaphor, of course, here. But the wilderness is the imaginative symbol of difficult times. The wilderness is not always identical. It can be overwhelming frustrations of overworking. It can be caring for the continuously unthankful. The wilderness can be the despair and loss and grief of despair and loss and grief. The wilderness can be dealing with health issues of many kinds and varying kinds of effects. In her book titled Unfair, Kimberly Griffith describes the wilderness of her personal grief. On July 7th, in 1995, she came home from work to find her 13-year-old daughter, 15-year-old son, and her husband murdered by his own hand. Kimberly describes this barren wilderness. Sometimes I feel like I'm in a barren wilderness all alone. The loneliness has a permanence and weight all its own. It became heavier and heavier as the sun went down, reaching its peak at dusk and at bedtime. It was often smothering, crushing, and paralyzing. The loneliness sapped my energy and desire. It even attacks me when I am not alone. Sometimes it even attacks me when I'm with my closest friends. Loneliness is ruthless. It's a deadly, barren wilderness. Job went through the same issues, and he laments with sorrow, grief, and loss. And Job says, "Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? Why were there knees to receive me and breasts that I might be nursed? For now I would be lying down in peace. I would be asleep and at rest." He's looking at the pain that he's going through. He's looking at the wilderness and all the things that he's lost. And we're all familiar with the story of Job. But he's lamenting over how bad times are. Wilderness has many shapes and forms. The wilderness is a place of despair and desperation. The wilderness is the anxiety of the unknown. The wilderness is the paralyzing fear of rejection. The wilderness is the suffocating compression of sorrow. The wilderness is the mourning of shame. The wilderness is the loss of innocence. The wilderness is the numbing of betrayal. The wilderness is a place of defeated dreams, lost hopes, unbearable burdens, shattered ambitions, destroyed goals, obliterated objectives, annihilated aims, assaulted aspirations, demolished determinations, emotional hardship, mental anguish, depressive deliberation. Oh, this is really encouraging, isn't it? It does get good. Dave. Yeah. Yeah, the wilderness is not just going through a time of temptation, as stated here. Wilderness can be all kinds of different issues of just, it's like, why am I going through this? And I feel alone, and I feel like I don't have anyone to support me and hold me up. And it can be from all kinds of different aspects and happenings in our life, whether it's with a job, whether it's with health, whether it's finances. The list goes on and on and on of all the things that can cause us to get into this wilderness, this time of, man, where am I? I just feel like I'm all alone. Well, Psalm 63 is a word for those in the wilderness. David has lived in the lap of luxury. David has known great success and victory, but now he is in the wilderness. David has been forced to evacuate Jerusalem. Absalom, the king's son, has led a revolt. He's stolen the hearts of the people. And I'm going to be quoting some passages through the book of Samuel here in 2 Samuel in different chapters. And it goes in order here. But it says that Absalom's son had led a revolt and he had stolen the hearts of the people. And here, and if it's italicized like that, that means that it's scripture that I'm using. So a messenger came and told David, the hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom. That's in 2 Samuel 15. Later on, David went weeping up the Mount of Olives with his head covered and his feet bare. But David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and he was barefoot. All the people with him covered their heads too and were weeping as they went. 2 Samuel 15:30. And David is fleeing in the wilderness, and as he goes, Shimei is cursing him and throwing stones at him. As King David approached Baronam, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. His name was Shimei, son of Gera, and he cursed as he came out. He pelted David and all the king's officials with stones, though all the troops and the special guard were on David's right and left. As he cursed, Shimei said, get out, you murderer, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you've reigned. The Lord has given the kingdom into the hands of your son Absalom. You have come to ruin because you are a murderer. That's chapter 16. David and those with him became weary in the wilderness. So David and his men continued along the road while Shimei was going along the hillside opposite him, cursing as he went and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. The king and all his people with him arrived at their destination exhausted. That's 2 Samuel 16. They were hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. They said, the people have come exhausted and hungry and thirsty in the wilderness. And that's chapter 17. So you got 15, 16, and 17 chapters explaining of what David was going through. He has to leave Jerusalem because of Absalom. And we need to be careful because we're not really sure what or the instance of when this happened. We just know that he was out in the wilderness. But here he's going through a tough time. And even while he's out in the wilderness, he's getting pelted with stones. He's getting cursed. They're exhausted. They're tired. It's not just a trip out in the wilderness. It's a bad trip. I dare say if your travel agency that you worked for only offered vacations in the wilderness, you wouldn't have a job very long due to the poor ratings of the company you work for. How many people look for, when they type in vacation spots, I'm looking for wilderness? No, It doesn't work. But even in the midst of the wilderness, we see once again where David turns to for his respite. In the first part of this psalm, in verses 1 and 2, David searches for God. And as I read this, I'm going to ask at the end, what's your impression of this? What do you get from this? Listen to this. You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water. I have seen you in the sanctuary, and behold your power and your glory. What's your first thoughts on that when you read that? Pardon? He's a believer? Okay. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Okay. Okay, there's the first honest answer. Yeah, it's convicting, isn't it? It's very convicting the way that David is talking here. You, God, are my God. I have no problem with that. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you. Wow, those are three packed lines of David saying, this is how my relationship is with you. And I need you. I appreciate your honesty. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to do what I know I'm supposed to do. I'm going to seek you and I'm going to thirst for you. Yeah. Okay.
If we can start.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. What? Yeah. It's amazing. And yeah. But I've got God on my side. Yeah. You can do whatever. Okay. So David had a spiritual experience in the wilderness. David survived the wilderness. Why? Because he went to the source of his strength. David was not about to try to work it out on his own. He was desperate, and his only place of refuge was his God. So that is what he sought. We too can make it. We can survive our wildernesses. We must not sentence ourselves to failure. The wilderness is not invincible. The wilderness can be subdued. It can be tamed. Search for God because his power and glory transcend the universe. Our place, wilderness, is not as important as his person. God is not relocated. He's omnipresent. David will say later on in Psalm 139, where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me and your right hand shall hold me. David had such an understanding that God is everywhere and will help him and be with them. Think of it this way. It's not where you are, but whose we are. You can be in the valley, but you can know it's victory. You can be in the storm, but you can know his strength. You can be in the wilderness, but you can know his wisdom. You can be in the desert, but you can know his divinity. You can be in the fire, but you can know his faithfulness. You can be in tribulation, but know his trustworthiness. You can be in loneliness, but know his love. You can be in mourning, but know his mercy. You can be in financial struggles, but know his ability to supply your every need. You can be in grief, but know his grace. Again, it's not where we are, but whose we are. And that's exactly what David does. David was in the wilderness, but he knew that he belonged to God. He says, "Oh God, you are my God." He does not focus on the place, the problem, or the pain. His focus is on his God. We must search for our God in our wilderness. Notice in verse 1, David says, "Earnestly I seek you." But in verse 2, he says, "I have seen you in the sanctuary." David's experience in the sanctuary, in worship and in fellowship, and this equipped him for the wilderness. It's interesting, people will say, "I don't need to go to church. I can worship on my own." You may be able to do that. But if you're successful in living out your faith without the help of others around you, you are definitely an exception to the rule. Communal worship keeps us strong and well-grounded. David was able to go to the sanctuary and see his God. And I believe it's not just that he was able to see God, but with the community of the other believers holding him up, it gave him strength as well. Secondly, David is satisfied with God in verses 3 through 5. He says this, "Because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. I will be fully satisfied as with the richest of foods. With singing lips, my mouth will praise you." David's search for God led to satisfaction with God. He expressed a thirst and longing for God. And once David recognized the power and glory of God, he could be satisfied with God. David was satisfied with God due to the love of God that he felt. A better translation would be, "because of your loving kindness." To David, the loving kindness of God was better than life. Loving kindness in the Hebrew term is chesed. It means steadfast love. It means acts of mercy and kindness. It means strength and fidelity. Chesed is not a matter of obligation or law. Chesed is a matter of devotion and affection. And this defines God's love, which David recognized. Although he's in the wilderness, he is relieved of the tension and frustrations of the wilderness. David says, "Your love, it's better than life." He has no life without God. His life has no meaning without God. His life has no direction with God. Yes, he is in the wilderness, but God's loving kindness continues to flow in his direction. David must express his praise of and to God even in the wilderness. Does that seem strange? David is in the wilderness, and David has every apparent reason to be sad or bitter, despondent, depressed, and sorrowful. But we find just the opposite. He's praising God. And he was thirsty and longing, but now he knows he will be satisfied as with food and drink. The Lord will prepare a table. The Lord will satisfy him. He is not governed by circumstances and conditions. He's not dominated by his position or place. But this is what the love of God will cause: your lips to praise him, your mouth to bless him, your hands to be lifted up in his name, your heart to rejoice, your mind to relax, your peace to return. David can sing, "Any way you bless me, Lord, I'll be satisfied," because he knows the power, glory, and loving kindness of God. And then David reminds himself of the story of God. On my bed, that's a better translation. So it wasn't God sleeping. He's not in bed. On my bed, I remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night. Because you are my help, I sing in the shadow of your wings. I cling to you. Your right hand upholds me. David remembers and meditates of the story of God in his life. When we're in the wilderness, it is imperative for us to remember and meditate on God. During the night watches, we should not fear the enemy, but meditate on the Lord. David remembers how the Lord has been his help. The Lord helped him to rescue the sheep from the lion and the bear. The Lord helped him defeat Goliath. The Lord helped him against Saul. The Lord helped him in battle. The Lord helped him when he was hungry. Has the Lord helped you? Well, listen to these. He gave his only son so you could live. He inspired his word to direct you. He built his church for your sanctification. He revealed truth. He offers his love, redemption, and forgiveness. He feeds you. He clothed you. He washed you. Therefore, rejoice and sing in the shadow of his wings. Follow close to him. Allow his right hand to hold you up. And then David closes off this psalm, and he's seeing the safety of God. Those who want to kill me will be destroyed. They will go down to the depths of the earth. They will be given over to the sword and become food for jackals. But the king will rejoice in God. All who swear by God will glory him, while the mouths of liars will be silenced. Only now does David speak of his enemies. He has searched for God. He is satisfied with God. He has recalled the story of God in his life. Now he expresses his safety and security in God. David's enemies wanted to take his life. They wanted him dead and dethroned, but it's too late because David had discovered something greater than life. It's interesting to see the pattern that David does. So often when we have a problem, when we're in our wildernesses, that's what consumes our focus and our, not with David. David goes to the right place first, and the last place that he's going is to where the problem is. I've got these enemies, God, and they're dealing with me, and I don't. But you're in control, and I've already affirmed that by the way I've looked at you, and I've seen how you take care of me, and I remember what you've done for me. David's got it in a right progression. I wonder if, because in our study of Psalms, we've seen this whole idea of the enemies, and they're trying to get after me, and so on and so forth. I wonder if in David's, and I wish we had it this way, but we don't have the Psalms written in a succinct order of, well, this is the first one they wrote, and this is the second one they wrote, and this is the third. It'd be interesting to see his transformation over time in writing the Psalms, whether there's a confidence that grows more and more in them. I don't know, just the point. Because he's very confident in this one. There's times where he'll come right out, God, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where you are. Where are you? So is there a transformation over time? I don't know. You don't get what the Old Testament, the importance of it? Well, the Old Testament is the story of the Jewish people, of God's people. And there was always a promise that there's going to be a Messiah. God was promising the Israelites, and David was the one chosen to be king, and it was going to be in his line, and that's why Jesus was from the line of David. So there's all kinds of different, it all goes back to God seeing his people, choosing his people, the same that he's chosen us. You could say in the New Testament that we're the Israelites, the church that Jesus died for. And the promise is for us. And so they were waiting for the Messiah. We've received the Messiah. So, but both of them, whether it's the old law or whether it's what Jesus came to do, was one purpose. It was to focus us on God. Well, in the Old Testament, if you go back to the time of Noah and even Adam, it's thought that it's about 3,000 years. Yeah. No, that's weekends. Yeah, Jesus was only here 2,000 years ago. So. Not 3,000 from now. Yeah, no, before Christ. Yeah. Anyway. So David's discovered that he's got something that's greater than all the problems that are going on. David's not ruthless, and he's not out for revenge or vengeance. David is both merciful and forgiving. In fact, he would eventually forgive Shimei, the guy that was pelting all the stones at him in 2 Samuel 17, for cursing and throwing stones at him. Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, love your enemy, or love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." David's enemies will go into the lower parts of the earth. They will fall by the sword because they lived by the sword. They shall become food for jackals. And the jackals are the scavenger animals. They consume what has been left by the larger animals. So in other words, there will be nothing left of his enemies whatsoever. But it's interesting, David leaves that to God to deal with. He's not doing it. They're not destroyed, or they are destroyed not because David wishes it so. They are destroyed because in going against David, they are attacking the Lord's anointed. In fighting against David, they are fighting against God. We remember David would not put a hand on Saul, even though David was being pursued by him and had numerous opportunities to harm Saul. Due to Saul being the Lord's anointed, David would not touch him. Consider when the apostles of Jesus were on trial and the people plotted to kill them in Acts 5. Gamaliel, a member of the council, he was a Pharisee, teacher of the law, and he was respected by all men. This is what he said. He's got the disciples in there, and they want to charge them. And he says, "In the present case, I advise you, leave these men alone. Let them go. For if their purpose or activity is of human origin, it will fail. But if it's from God, you will not be able to stop these men. You will only find yourselves fighting against God." And that's what David understood. This fight isn't against me. He didn't take it personally. He was ticked off when they didn't revere his God. He wasn't ticked off when they didn't revere him. And so he had that just shows the amount of love that he had for him. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we can't take it personally. That's what David didn't do. For the first time in the psalm, David identifies himself as the king. He's in the wilderness. He's been forced to vacate the city and the throne, but he's still the king. His relationship with God has not altered. His place in God's kingdom has not been revoked. And David remembers God's covenant with him. He will remember when Nathan would say these words to him, "When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod. I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will never be taken from him, as I took it away from Saul whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever." So he's talking about two different people there. He's talking about his son Solomon, who is going to become the king. But he also says, "But I will establish your throne forever." So it's also prophetic that he's talking about Jesus, that the throne of David will last forever. David would have remembered these words and relied on them and the giver of them. He remembered the promise and he relied on it. We too have the same hope as David had. In fact, ours is even more secure due to the promises we received through Jesus and the deposit of his Spirit in our lives. I thought of this song, which talks about our hope, our assurance, that even when we're in the wilderness, there's a place that we can all go to. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. That kind of sound the same sentiments that David was saying, "In you, God, I put my trust, I seek you and I go to you." When darkness hides his lovely face, I rest on his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. Doesn't matter what type of wilderness we go through, we have an anchor that will hold. His oath, his covenant, his blood support me in the whelming flood. When all around my soul gives way, he then is all my hope and stay. When he shall come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then in him be found, dressed in his righteousness alone, faultless to stand before the throne. On Christ, the solid rock, I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. Yeah. Well, again, we're using the word wilderness as a metaphor to life. Yeah. Yeah, he uses some terms like a dry and thirsty land. We're not a dry and thirsty land. It doesn't take long for us to find a place to be able to get a drink from a stream or a brook or something, and it's pretty safe to drink up here. So, but yeah, he's talking about a wilderness that we really can't Yeah. Yeah. And that's what he's driven to. And we need to get the whole picture here of this is David the king. This is the guy that lived in the lap of luxury. He lived in the palace. And all of a sudden, his son comes along and says, you know what? My dad's not fit to be king anymore. This is his own son. He's not fit to be king. And he started to win the hearts of the people. And he's driven out of town, not to another town, but to a wilderness, to a place. Why wasn't he fit to be king? Well, he was fit to be king, but Absalom was jealous and he wanted to have the throne. So he went and he got some people to conspire around him, and he started spreading some rumors about his dad. And he was basically out on a campaign trail looking for votes, and he got some good votes, and he got the people to rally around him. And so, out of fear, David ran out of town and didn't. But in his running, in his fear, he relied on God. So he ran to a safe place. I wouldn't think that the wilderness would be a safe place, but he had confidence that his God would take care of him. Any other comments before we close? I will say this guarantees that changing it to Sunday morning, we get more people. This is the first week. We'll see what happens down the road. So, but for those that don't normally get to be out on Wednesday nights, it's good to have you with us. David Miller, could you close us off in prayer? Amen.